This YouTube series started with a DNA test, but it was fueled by a mystery. What am I? Who are my people? Although I'm half white, I never really thought of myself as one. Not that I'm any better or worse, just not white. Not Jew, not black, not Mexican, not Arab. What the hell am I? I glommed onto Adam Warlock back in the 1970s, risen from a cocoon, ready to help, trusted by nobody. The DNA and some cyber footwork helped me solve the mystery of my core racial identity almost immediately. Once I figured out what I was, my next goal was to figure out what to call us. I was satisfied with Anatolian until the day I started this segment because that's where we're from, and I couldn't think of an alternative. But this week I confidently figured out what we called ourselves a long time ago. That name in turn helped me solve a mystery, and by doing that it strengthened my case. We are the Captor. The Captor, or the Captor, are well known to Bronze Age Mediterranean scholars. They all know that Crete is one of the possible homelands of the Captor, and most would agree that it is not. But there is no consensus, and there are half a dozen candidates, none of which have a majority fan base. I consider that a clue. One of my major sources for most of what follows, along with Wikipedia, is John Strange's Captor, a new investigation. Dr. Strange doesn't think this is Crete. Unfortunately, he's determined to prove it isn't Crete, and that it's Cyprus instead. He's been taken to task for that. Double unfortunate for him. Scholars are close to dead certain about what they called Cyprus, Alatia, so there's no need for a captor. On the other hand, if not captor, I have no idea what people would have called Crete and Cretans. We were a big deal. We had to show up in Syrian and Egyptian records. Captor does in a way that's consistent with us. Now I have to tell you as a matter of due diligence that Strange's book is out of print and I cannot afford a personal copy. There also is no digital copy. So I had to work to my conclusion based on what I read around the internet and from a sample of the book, but also from my own work with the Captor and their language. So let's look at some of the examples of Captor as it's shown up in various documents. 1780 to 1760 BC. Captor man receives 10 from Mari. Captorite weapon. So whoever these people are, they have a first world economy by 1800 BC. I say this because they're importing raw material and exporting high-end finished product. 1450 BC. Scribe practices a list of common names of people from Keftiu. 2 Akkadian, 4 Western Semitic, 6 Hurrian, 1 mixed Western Semitic Hurrian, 1 North Syrian, 1 Philistine name. This polyglot of names makes you wonder if there even is a people called the Captor, but we are the Children of Proteus, so don't be surprised if we start looking and acting a lot like the people we're living among, including taking on their names. Remember, in the book of Genesis, Abraham and Isaac both meet a Philistine named Abimelech. That name is pure Semitic. On the other hand, these categories are drawn up by another scholar who compares the names on the list to names on documents from neighboring regions, so there's no telling how right they are, or wrong. 1450 BC. Tomb of Rekhmir. Keftiu could not be set off from the Wedge Ware, the Islands of the Sea, or the Great Green, the Nile Delta. You'd think there's not much for me to hang my hat on here, but in 18th dynasty Egypt, even this ambiguity plays into my hands. Turns out, we'd erected a major building on the Nile Delta, although whether it rose to the level of a palace remains to be seen. A reconstruction of one of its walls is on display on Crete today. And with this building, the cat in the hat has arrived in Egypt. Let the fun begin. 1450 BC. Tribute of the Prince of Tene to Pharaoh Thutmosis III. A Keftuan silver Shawapti vessel with bowls made of iron. Iron is a priceless commodity at this early stage. So whoever these people were, they'd already been a major economic power for 300 years by the time this document was written, and now their products are in the stratosphere technologically. They rank with iron, which in this day and age may as well have been platinum. So, if Captor is an island in the Mediterranean, it has to be Crete. There's no way it's Cyprus. Their biggest export with a bullet was copper. In fact, the English word copper comes from the Roman name of that island. So now let's turn to the city-state of Ugarit in Syria. This was one of our major trading partners. Go to the Lord of Hikkaput, God of all. Captor is the throne on which he sits. Hikkapta is the land of his inheritance. And prostrate, bow yourself down and do homage to him. And say to Kothar Wahusis, repeat to Hayin, the one with skillful hands. Kothar Wahusis is the local Ugarit name for the Egyptian god Ptah. He's the master builder of the world, and the god of master builders. Hikkapta is Egypt, his inheritance. The Ptah in Egypt to this very day is his name. Nevertheless, he lived among the Captor. We were master builders and inventors and metalworkers. They were master builders and inventors and metalworkers. We are the same people. Please note, Kothar Wahusis is called the god of all here. I cannot find a similar epithet for Ptah or him anywhere else. I've always believed that at least some of the Cretans were henotheists, who practiced a religion similar to Zoroastrianism. This is like monotheism. There are different gods, but one God rules them all. And at the end of the day, he's the one true God. The original Israelites were henotheists. Ptah also had green skin, and this brings to mind the great green mentioned on the tomb of Rekhmir. It might be related to this. If it is, then that makes this term even more ambiguous. I would actually kick that up to delicious, a true mot juste. The next reference to him mentions Captor, but not Egypt. It's a series of spells against snakebite, directed towards different gods and their habitation. 1500 to 1450 BC. She goes to Salpas, her mother. Salpas, mother, bring the call towards Kothar Wahusis, towards Kaptar. The next quote comes from the Old Testament. 640 to 609 BC. Jeremiah 47 uses the term Kaftor. Philistines are the remnants from the coastland or island of Kaftor. So with this, we see it's either an island or it's on the coast. The next one is interesting. You know how Israel is called Palestine? That means Philistine. The Greeks typically lump the Philistines with the Israelites and the Phoenicians. You see that in part 3 of my series, Working Through the Festus Disc. Here's more of that funniness. 237 BC in Egypt, Phoenicia is called Keftiu. So here they call Phoenicia Palestine. That would include modern-day Lebanon as well as Israel. It's during this time that the Jews wrote their Book of Jubilees, with its especially harsh curses leveled against the Philistines. We've always rattled the Jews. We do to this very day. That's why Iran is giving them a heart attack. It's also kicking their ass. This final quote comes from much later. It's a gloss on a text written centuries before, and it, in turn, is based on information from centuries before that. 300 to 400 AD. Kabdaros mentioned. This is a late version of the Semitic Kaptara, probably an echo of some earlier connection between Captor and southern Turkey. Here's Crete, and here's the territory we're talking about. So now we have a connection with southern Turkey. That makes sense. It's right north of Cyprus. This is after the Trojan War, so right before the Bronze Age collapse and the migrations that it set off, if not during. As it happens, I think the word captor has shown up somewhere else, not on a document. It's been right in front of our eyes for nearly 3,000 years. I didn't even notice it until this week when I was working through these texts. Captor is consistent with the Minoan languages. I think I've come to understand it. I immediately noticed the two consonantal pronunciations used in this name, Captor and Captor. This was gratifying, because I think there's something odd going on with that sound in Minoan words. Sometimes words are handed down with a P sound, and other times with a F sound. For example, the city name Festus in Greek is written Pito in Minoan. Now, in the last segment, I told you that ptero in pterodactyl is almost certainly Minoan. I say that because the Greeks had a special symbol representing the pt sound that was only used on Minoan names. Here it's in the name the Minoans themselves went by. So let's add a suffix to this, inus, of, belonging to, pertaining to, the captor. So we have Captorinus, which could have reasonably migrated to Capitolinus. These are both alveolars. As you can see, the R and the L are very close. So let's switch up the spelling so that it looks more familiar and changes the pronunciation just a little bit by adding a scrap of vowel between the P and the T. Capitolinus. The Capitoline Hill. Colus Capitolinus. One of the 7 hills of Rome and the first place the Romans settled. No more Egyptians, no more Greeks, no more Mesopotamians, no more Sicilians or Etruscans or Southern Italians. This is unclaimed, unworked territory. This is ours. It belongs to us. This is Captor Hill. I know there's a legend that the Romans found a skull digging for the temple of Jupiter and that this is Skull Hill, from the Latin word for skull. Nobody knows what Capitoline means. Some think it means commanding heights. My explanation makes all the sense in the world. It's not impossible that people can forget something like this. We thought we were American Indians for decades. Turns out our ancestor was a Turk. He was a scout for General Thomas Sumter in the American Revolution. That's pretty spectacular, isn't it? We had no clue. Let's go back to the map. On the left, you will find Rome. It's farther away from Crete than southern Turkey, but if you're going by boat along the coast, it's just an extra week at most. You can secure supplies along the way very nicely, and you'll have plenty of compatriots to see you along since your people have been colonizing this territory for centuries. Here's the Piazza del Campidoglio on the Capitoline Hill. It was designed by the divine Michelangelo. And in the center of the piazza is the divine Marcus Aurelius, military commander, emperor, and philosopher. Students read his Stoic classic Meditations to this very day. He only wrote them for himself, and they were never meant to be published. History would have none of that. Be like a rocky promontory against which the restless surf continually pounds. It stands fast while the churning sea is lulled to sleep at its feet. I hear you say, "How unlucky that this should happen to me." Not at all. Say instead, "How lucky that I am not broken by what has happened, and am not afraid of what is about to happen." The same blow might have struck anyone, but not many would have absorbed it without capitulation or complaint. This is the design Michelangelo created for the piazza. It looks like the symbol for Ka, which is at the heart of side A of the Festus disc. It might have been the first symbol used in the written incarnation of the word Captor. How about that for coming full circle? The Captors celebrated the Ka. They had these rosettes everywhere, and I used to think they were just decorative. Now I know they were not. Here's the opening for part 4 of my series, Working Through the Festus Disc. I covered this VT at the end of side B, and I covered the final crescendo of side A too. But I kept looking at that flower, dead center. I kept thinking, that has to mean something. The disc is round, the flower is round, a full individuated personality is round. But I knew me, so I knew I was always looking for patterns and random events, and I didn't want to touch it. Besides, I was so tired of working on this video, I didn't want to add anything else. But that little flower kept telling me, pay attention. This is the symbol for Ka. In his signary, Owens uses the example konako, kniku in Greek, safflower. That certainly set off my Carl Jung detector. In full bloom, this flower imagines itself a miniature sun, and we project the fullness of our character on the sun and its light. Then I thought, doesn't Ka mean something to the Egyptians? They were practically Crete's neighbors, so you'd expect some Egyptian influence on Minoan religion. And so it does. Ka. It's a vital spark that separates the living from the dead. The Ba is the person's individual character, and if properly released, the Ba will leave the body and join the Ka in eternal life. So now, we can't say I'm reading into this. The Ka was put dead center for a reason. It's a kernel around which our whole being is wrapped. This Egyptian wall immortalizes our mystery tradition. From the Ka comes the mind, and the mind is a labyrinth, and it's full of terror. But with the help of our friends, we can master those terrors
and ride them like a rocket. These are all gifts of the divine and are meant to serve us.
I have excellent news for you. This mystery is not an option. You will ride the bull, or the bull will ride you. This is the murderous Minotaur. You have the man and you have the beast. For something so dark, allegedly including human sacrifice, there sure are a lot of bright, pretty colors. Here's what I think our name could have meant.
Ka, the spirit, the animating life spark. Pter, wing, pterodactyl, wing finger, the name of the famous animal. We are the winged spirit, just like the Pegasus, the winged horse.
So what's going on? What brought us here? As it turns out, you probably know about the historical events that precipitated this migration. You just don't know all about them. I've been hinting at it throughout this segment. Did you notice how close we were to the Egyptians? We got even closer. This did not end well.
Here we have a graph showing us about trade relations between Crete and the Eastern Mediterranean. It picks up nicely, and then after late Minoan 3a, boom, dead in the water. The mainland Greeks try to pick up the slack, but it doesn't seem to have worked out that well. I got this graph from Rethinking Mycenaean Palaces to Rethinking Mycenaean International Trade with Egypt and the Near East.
Late Minoan 3a. This is when the handmade burnished ware makes its first appearance on Crete. I talk about that in Part 4, Modern DNA, the barbarian ware. I bet there were a lot of young men running around with nothing to do, and young families. This is a first-order social catastrophe, and the Cretans needed to move quick. Here's what happened.
This is a papyrus from El Amarna. El Amarna is the capital city of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten of the 18th dynasty. And these are Mycenaean soldiers with boar's tusk helmets. But once again, these aren't Mycenaeans, these are Cretans. The trade graph I just showed you tells you that. The pottery puts more meat on the bone. Up to this point, Mycenaean trade with Egypt had been minimal. A few pieces of imported pottery could be Late Minoan 1b or Late Helletic 2a. By contrast, Late Helletic 3a2 through B pottery, mainly closed shapes such as piriform jars, alabastra, stirrup jars, and flasks, is known from around 30 sites on the Mediterranean coast and the Nile, as far south as Nubia. It is found in settlements, in official and domestic contexts, and in temples and tombs. However, most of the pottery, 1,500 to 1,600 sherds, comes from just one site, Amarna. This was a city built by Amenhotep's son, the pharaoh Akhenaten, circa 1353 to 1337 BC, as the capital of Egypt, and abandoned soon after his death. Akhenaten abandoned the Egyptian gods and worshipped the sun disk Aten. I'm not going to push this too hard, but I couldn't shake the strong impression I had when surveying the Festus disk that the religion on the disk is very similar to the one we're seeing here in Egypt and among the early Israelites, and I think my survey on the actual text propped that door open. And again, I point out, we're talking about a connection with an Iranian religion, and we were in contact with Iranians because we needed Afghani tin to make our bronze weapons for export, and we were directly linked to these Iranians by blood. I'm just saying this for the record. I'd be happy to back away from it if future discoveries make that position impossible. After Akhenaten died, the Egyptian priests regained control, struck him out of their histories, and left his city to rot in the desert.
And they sent us Cretans packing too. This deepens a possibility that we were more than just passive partners to the heretic pharaoh. I wonder if we weren't the heretics who converted Pharaoh in the first place. And just on point, right after the fallout from the reign of Akhenaten, big things start happening on Captor Hill.
The excavation of the Giardino Romano has provided new and important information on the type of occupation and activities on the Capitoline Hill during the recent Bronze Age. In particular, the excavation has revealed a reorganization of the north slope of the Capitoline with the creation of an earth terrace/fortification built with a dual purpose, to defend this side of the hill and to enlarge the inhabited area. The mobilization and coordination of labor for this work possibly implied the existence of a ruling class that was able to organize and impose on a great portion of the community a prolonged period of corvée labor, which would have drawn workers away from subsistence labor in the fields. According to Cotzella, this massive work testifies to a particularly advanced stage of social organization of the Roman community at this time, and possibly a particular interest in the river Tiber and its ford. In the later stages of the Bronze Age, from around 1200 BC, major changes become apparent in the archaeological record. First, there is a marked increase in the number of sites and the range of artifacts represented in each site. These phenomena almost certainly indicate an increasing population. There are clear signs, too, of growth in the size of settlements. This demographic growth continues into the Iron Age. In the opinion of R. Peroni, if we can measure the population of an early or middle Bronze Age settlement in dozens, and that of a late Bronze Age one in hundreds, it is without doubt legitimate to think of an early Iron Age settlement as having thousands of inhabitants.
I doubt anybody had to be forced to do anything here. We were in trouble. We were on Captor Hill, and we were on Captor Hill to stay. Once again, I guarantee you we'd been surveying this site for decades. We knew going into this exactly how much trouble it would take to fix and when that trouble would become worth it. After the Bronze Age collapse, thousands of desperate Cretans, and no doubt people from mainland Greece, started pouring into central Italy. It wasn't nearly ready for prime time, but we would make it work. We started pouring into other parts of the Mediterranean too, like Cyprus.
The subsequent cultural phase of Late Cypriot 3A, LC, was marked by various novelties that exhibited a distinct Aegean character. LC3A pottery in particular shows Mycenaean influences. Moreover, the cultural novelties of LC3A were not exclusively of Mycenaean character. Horns of consecration, a symbol shaped like abstract bullhorns, found at Myrtos, Kition, and Palypaphos, were Minoan features. Even handmade burnished pottery appears in LC3A contexts. It is therefore likely that people from various parts of the Aegean banded together and set off for Cyprus. Now let's go to our map again. On the bottom right, we see Cyprus.
Everybody was moving everywhere in the Mediterranean. There's some genetic evidence that men from mainland Greece had actually migrated to Crete. Cyprus not only survived the Bronze Age collapse, she thrived. She got thousands of skilled workers from different parts of the Mediterranean. This just confirms to me that Cyprus is not the home of the Captor. Remember, she would be using our syllabary for her writing system for another 1,000 years. And now I'm going to shift gears completely. My theory that the Romans are from Crete has a rival. Turns out the Romans are from Switzerland. It's going to take me about 5 minutes to demolish that.
This is the map of the R1b U152 haplogroup that's supposed to represent the men who built Rome. Here are their hotspots. As you can see, they have nothing to do with the Italic speakers, while as you know, we have everything to do with them. Now, everyone agrees that whoever the Romans are, they started pouring into Italy before 1200 BC. This map of languages spoken 600 years later proves these men weren't even in Italy yet. I count at least 4 different languages alive and well within their area of highest concentration today. That and their weak connection with Italic speakers tells me all I need to know. I can tell you exactly who these people are. They're Gauls, and they didn't start pouring into Italy until more than 100 years after this map. We know for a fact from historical documents that they specifically targeted the Po Valley, and sure enough, they're concentrated there. And here we see a map of the other Gallic tribes in France during Julius Caesar's invasion. Let's mark the map for his battles. They obviously had a big impact on the local U152 population, and after we conquered them, we enslaved them. They were too big and caused too much trouble. They were a threat to our very survival in the peninsula of Italy. It was harsh, but they have descendants alive and well today all up and down Italy. It could have been a lot worse.
Remember, the Gauls attacked us first. They attacked the Etruscans and the Greeks, too.
Here's a map of the U152s compared to the whole Roman Empire. As you can see, it's hopeless. This is central Italy. It's consistent with them being imported as slaves. This is Spain. There should be plenty of them here because thousands of Roman troops settled here. Their descendants were so numerous they'd send emperors back to Rome. This is Gaul itself, modern France, largely depopulated by Julius Caesar. That's reflected in this map. No evidence they targeted the area around Constantinople like we did. and as you'd expect ethnic Romans to do. You do see them concentrated in Venice, which is in the Po Valley, so you would expect that. You see a surprisingly high number of them on Crete. Venice ruled Crete for almost 500 years. That's probably when a lot of them went over. Here we have all the R1Bs compared to the Roman Empire, equally hapless. They're weak where they should be strong if they were the Romans. R1Bs make up by far the biggest group of men in Europe. They came crashing in more than 1,000 years before we did, so we were playing in their backyard. You could say we were the invaders, but they had 1,000 years to make something out of Italy, and they didn't. I doubt we had any regrets. Only one scenario makes sense here. Anatolian men settled in Italy, built an empire, and moved out into colonies. We didn't stop after the fall of Rome. We continued on into Byzantium, and after Constantinople fell, we ran the Ottoman Empire.
The Ottomans would rule the most enduring empire in the history of Islam. It was, in fact, the most enduring empire in the history of the Middle East. We know how to manage stable societies. The sultans knew that, which is why they kept their bureaucrats happy. Now, one of the things we just knew for sure was that the Romans relied on Greek civic genius to make their city work. Well, the archaeology's been coming in hot and heavy the last 30 years, and we now know the truth. The Greeks needed the Romans.
In particular, excavations and re-evaluation studies have revealed a number of features of Rome between the middle of the 8th and the middle of the 7th century BC, such as an earthen wall around the Palatine Hill, a forum for civic assemblies, cult places, and a special aristocratic residence, equipped for official meetings and/or ritual meals, which materialized slightly earlier or at least at the same time as the first Greek colonies in southern Italy. Furthermore, recent studies conducted in southern Italy have suggested that in some cases, Western Greek colonial communities experimented with and created the urban model even before it was adopted in mainland Greece. As a consequence, it has been argued that the development of the idea of the polis in Greece was in reality accelerated by contacts with the open and modern world of Western colonies. We might have even had literacy before anyone else. The first sample is from Latium near Rome, the Ola on top. The second is the Cup of Nestor from a Greek colony in Italy. Basically, we all started writing again at the same time Homer was reciting his epics, probably a little before, so I doubt his stories remained a strictly oral tradition more than a generation.
So, do you still want to believe the Romans are from Switzerland? Crete is the land of 90 cities. Everything's lined up nicely. Rome, then the Greek colonies in southern Italy, then the Greek city-states in Greece. A perfect chain. After centuries of hard work, the Romans would finally appreciate their contribution to Italian history. They were no longer strangers in a strange land. They belonged there.
M. Terentius Varro's most important work was the Antiquitates, divided between 25 books on res humanae and 16 on res divinae, human and divine affairs. Cicero, in a remarkable tribute, says it made the Romans feel that they had been strangers in their own country, but were now being shown the way home.
This man wrote almost 1,000 years after the Romans started pouring into central Italy. Isn't that odd? Why should the Romans feel like intruders? The territory was largely uninhabited. They're right next to their alleged brethren. Not. Let's go back to the map to see why this makes sense.
Here are the Papal States. This is our alleged homeland right here. We're supposed to be one of the Gallic tribes. Well, there are more Gauls right over here. A few days on a boat and you're home free. These are the Balkans, one of our other possible homelands. We're direct neighbors, another little boat trip. On the other hand, if our homeland is all the way over here, we would be in our own little pocket, surrounded by strangers who can't really make heads or tails of us.
I know the feeling. The Romans felt alienated from their neighbors. This wasn't a bug, this was a feature. They were in a cocoon. This time its walls were made of men instead of water or mountains. A cocoon is supposed to turn you into an alien. I think it's very important that you understand, my people, especially if you're a Christian in the world today. Maybe you feel like a second-class citizen because the message is hammered every day that the Jews are still the chosen people of God. I see that in academia. I see that among so-called Christians, too. But with my series on the Festus disc, I've shown that there is a group of non-Jews who've also had a huge impact on the salvation history of the world. Us. And as I've shown with this segment, we might have kick-started the Bible. I believe we are in the New Testament. Not the Roman Empire, the Captor. I believe the Lord Jesus Christ himself acknowledges us as his own.
As the Father knoweth me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold, and one shepherd. Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it again.
I was going to bring this passage up in my series on the Festus disc. It segued very nicely with my position that we were a second foundation operating discreetly in the background. Better, the Jews were the play, we were the stage. But I didn't want to just pile things on, and it seemed tenuous at best anyway. But between then and now, I remembered where Jesus said that. The Gospel of John, that strange outlier of the four Gospels. And where was John written? Let's look at the map.
By tradition, John came from the city of Ephesus. It's on the right side of this map, near the top. The companion to John's Gospel is the book of Revelation. By tradition, it was written when John was in exile on the island of Patmos, on the left-hand side on the bottom. It's the island that looks like a seahorse. Right in between these two is the famous Captor colony of Miletus. Miletus was also the home of one of the two men who designed the Church of Hagia Sophia, which was a building so bolt out of the blue amazing it converted the Russians to Christianity. Miletus marked the northeastern boundary of what I call Greater Crete in part 1 of my series on the Festus disc. So now, let's expand the map out a bit. Here you see the territory I just marked. On the very bottom, on the right-hand side, we have Jerusalem. At the very top, just left of center, we have Constantinople, also called Byzantium, the new Rome we built in the 4th century. Let's expand the map out farther. We're going to bring in the old Rome and bring in my old migration marking from part 1 of my series on the Festus disc. It's a beautiful match, especially when you bring in Constantinople, which you should by my reckoning. Jerusalem might have been a bit farther inland than we penetrated, but it's close.
It's been nearly 5 hours of footage between this series and the series on the Festus disc, and I am now finished. I hope I've slain 2 dragons. The first dragon says we were everybody else's war prize. The second dragon is a modern one, and it tells us that the Jews are still God's only chosen people, and that we European Christians are interlopers on a sacred drama. I see that in academia, and I see that among modern so-called Christians. To be honest, I think I've restored our position as the end to which that drama has always been directed, and I've fortified that with the surprising proofs that we were the vehicle that made that drama possible. I'm sure more proof that I'm right will come along, and very soon, because I'm right, and because we're always coming up with new things. We're getting very clever at figuring out where to look and how to look for it. Even 5 years ago, this series would have been impossible. I'll probably post some updates here and there, especially if big stuff comes in. I've been praying all along that I be honorable and that I be useful. I hope you think well of me on both counts. Farewell.